Before the hills of Canaan were covered with flocks and before Jacob and Esau ever took their first breath, the story of their lives began with a promise whispered long before they were born. Isaac, son of Abraham, had taken Rebekah as his wife, yet for many years she remained barren. Isaac prayed earnestly to the Lord on her behalf, and God heard him. In time Rebekah conceived, but her pregnancy was unlike anything she had imagined. The children struggled within her, their movements fierce and restless, as though two warriors battled even in the hidden darkness of her womb. Troubled by the turmoil inside her, Rebekah sought the Lord, asking, "If all is well, why am I like this?" And the Lord answered her with a prophecy that would shape the destiny of nations. "Two nations are in your womb, two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." These words echoed in her heart like distant thunder, full of mystery and divine purpose. When the time came for her to give birth, the struggle she had felt was revealed in dramatic form. The first to emerge was Esau, red and covered with hair like a garment. His appearance was wild, fiery, and strong, and they named him Esau. But even before Rebekah could draw breath, a small hand reached out from the womb and grasped Esau's heel. Then came the second child, smooth-skinned, quiet, yet born with a sign of determination that would mark his entire life. They named him Jacob, the heel-grabber, but also the one who supplants, for his destiny was hidden within his very first gesture. Isaac watched his sons with wonder, knowing God's hand was upon them both, yet in different and mysterious ways. As the boys grew, their differences became unmistakable. Esau became a man of the field, bold, rugged, and swift. He hunted game with skill and strength, returning home with wild meat, his clothes carrying the scent of forests and open plains. Jacob, however, was a quiet man, dwelling among the tents. He loved the stillness of the camp, the warmth of the fire, and the gentle ways of shepherding. Rebekah found joy in Jacob's thoughtful spirit, while Isaac's heart was drawn to Esau's vigor. Favoritism slowly wove invisible threads of tension through the family, setting the stage for conflict that would one day erupt. One evening, Esau returned from the field exhausted and faint with hunger. Jacob was cooking a stew, and the aroma drifted through the air, rich and inviting. Esau stumbled toward him, saying, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am weary." Jacob looked at him intently, sensing an opportunity. "Sell me your birthright today," he said. Esau waved a dismissive hand, caring little for the future. "I am about to die. What is a birthright to me?" Jacob insisted, and Esau swore an oath, selling his birthright for a simple meal. As Esau ate and drank, Jacob watched him in silence. It was not hunger that had driven Esau to this choice, but a deeper impulsiveness that would haunt him. The birthright, leadership, blessing, and covenant promise was now Jacob's, though the struggle between them was far from over. Time passed, and Isaac grew old. His eyes dimmed, and he could no longer see. Knowing his days were numbered, he called Esau and asked him to hunt game and prepare his favorite meal, that he might bless him before he died. But Rebekah overheard and remembered God's prophecy. She devised a plan, urging Jacob to take Esau's place. Jacob hesitated, fearing a curse, but Rebekah reassured him. Together they prepared a meal, dressed Jacob in Esau's garments, and covered his smooth skin with goat hair. Jacob approached Isaac with a trembling heart. "Who are you, my son?" Isaac asked. "I am Esau," Jacob replied, his voice quiet yet determined. Isaac touched him. The hands felt like Esau's, though the voice was Jacob's. Still uncertain, Isaac asked again, but Jacob remained steadfast. At last Isaac ate, drank, and blessed him, passing on the covenant promises of Abraham. Moments later, Esau returned. When Isaac realized what had happened, he trembled violently. Esau wept with a cry that shook the household, begging for a blessing, but the birthright and the covenant were already given. Esau's grief turned to fury, and he vowed to kill Jacob once Isaac died. Rebekah, hearing this, urged Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran. In haste and fear, Jacob left the home he loved, carrying nothing but God's promise and a heart torn by conflict. Yet even in their rivalry, God was working a plan far greater than either brother understood. Through Jacob would come the 12 tribes of Israel, and through Esau would rise mighty nations. The struggle between them was more than a family conflict, it was the unfolding of divine destiny. And though their story began in tension and deception, it would not end that way. For the God who formed them, who spoke of 2 nations in the womb, would one day lead them to reconciliation, healing what rivalry had broken. From the moment Jacob grasped Esau's heel, an unseen tension wove itself through their lives, shaping every decision and every moment of rivalry between the 2 brothers. Esau, with his strength and passion, lived in the wild spaces of the earth, thriving under the open sky. Jacob, quiet and thoughtful, stayed near the tents, ever watchful, ever listening. Though they shared blood and a home, their paths could not have been more different. And beneath their differences lay the ancient prophecy that Rebekah kept close to her heart: the older would serve the younger. Yet how this would unfold remained hidden, until the day the birthright changed hands over a simple bowl of stew. Esau returned from the wilderness one evening exhausted and famished, his breath ragged, his face streaked with sweat and dust. Jacob stirred a pot over the fire, the aroma of lentils rising into the air. Esau's hunger clouded his judgment, dulling the weight of what he possessed. When he begged for the stew, Jacob's eyes sharpened. "Sell me your birthright today," he demanded. The words, though spoken quietly, carried the force of destiny. Esau threw caution aside. "What is a birthright to me? I am dying of hunger." He swore the oath, sealing the exchange. Jacob handed him the stew, and Esau ate greedily, never realizing he had just surrendered the spiritual inheritance of generations. Jacob, however, knew exactly what had happened. The first shift in the divine plan had taken place, and the birthright now belonged to him. Years passed, and Isaac grew old. His eyesight dimmed until he could barely see, and the weight of age rested heavily on his shoulders. One day he called Esau, his favorite son, and asked him to hunt game and prepare the savory meal he loved, that he might bless him before he died. To Isaac, this blessing was not merely an expression of affection, it was the passing on of spiritual authority, the covenant promise given first to Abraham. But Rebekah overheard, and her heart stirred with urgency. She remembered what God had spoken while her sons were yet in her womb. She knew the blessing belonged to Jacob. And so she devised a plan bold enough to alter the fate of nations. "Bring me 2 young goats," she whispered to Jacob. "I will prepare a meal just as your father loves. You shall take it to him, and he will bless you instead of Esau." Jacob hesitated, fear darkening his face. "My brother is hairy, and I am smooth. If my father touches me, he will know. I shall bring a curse upon myself, not a blessing." But Rebekah did not waver. "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice." Determination flashed in her eyes, for she moved not from ambition, but from faith in God's promise. Jacob yielded, though his hands trembled. Rebekah prepared the meal, dressing Jacob in Esau's garments and covering his hands and neck with goat skins. When Jacob approached Isaac, the tent was dim and silent except for the soft crackling of flames. "My father," Jacob said softly. Isaac replied, "Who are you, my son?" Jacob swallowed hard. "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac frowned, sensing the difference in the voice. "How did you find game so quickly, my son?" Jacob's reply was low, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." Isaac beckoned in closer. Jacob stepped forward, his breath shallow, his heart pounding. Isaac touched his hands. The coarse hair felt like Esau's. He leaned in, the scent of Esau's garments clung to Jacob. "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are Esau's," Isaac murmured. Yet in his frailty, he yielded to what he felt rather than what he heard. After eating, Isaac lifted his hands and blessed Jacob with words carrying the weight of heaven. "God give you the dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow to you. Be Lord over your brothers." No sooner had Jacob left the tent than Esau returned from the hunt. He prepared the meal eagerly and approached Isaac with confidence. "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game," he said. Isaac trembled violently. Who was it that just brought me food?" "I have eaten and blessed him, indeed he shall be blessed." Esau's cry filled the camp, raw and anguished. "Bless me, me also, O my father," he wept. Isaac's heart broke, but he could not undo what God had decreed. Esau begged again, his voice cracking. Isaac offered him a lesser blessing, but the grief in Esau's soul turned quickly to fury. "The days of mourning for my father are near," he muttered in rage, "then I will kill my brother Jacob." Rebekah heard of Esau's murderous intent and ran to Jacob with urgency. "Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran," she said. "Stay with him until your brother's anger subsides." Jacob, heart heavy with fear and guilt, gathered what little he had and prepared to leave the land of his fathers. Isaac, learning of his departure, called him and blessed him anew, not with deceit this time, but with the full covenant promise, "May God Almighty bless you, make you fruitful, and give you the blessing of Abraham." As Jacob walked away from his home, he felt the weight of separation, of guilt, and yet also of destiny. The struggle for the birthright had begun with stew and ended with deception, but God was weaving a plan far deeper than human schemes. Jacob carried with him not only the blessing but the responsibility of a future that would shape a nation. Esau, burning with anger, retreated into the wilderness, his life marked by struggle and independence. The birthright and blessing had been settled, yet the conflict between them had only just begun. But even this rivalry, painful and bitter as it was, would one day be redeemed, for the God who shaped them both had written reconciliation into the very fabric of their story. Jacob left his home under the weight of fear, uncertainty, and the consequences of his own actions. The desert stretched before him, vast and silent, its winds whispering truths he could no longer escape. He had deceived his father, stolen from his brother, and fled from the wrath that now burned in Esau's heart. Each step carried him farther from the land of his fathers, yet closer to a destiny he could not yet see. Lonely and burdened, Jacob traveled through rugged hills and barren plains, feeling the ache of exile settle deep within him. The once familiar world behind him faded into memory, and ahead lay only the unknown road to Haran, the household of his uncle Laban. But though Jacob walked alone, heaven watched him with unwavering attention. As the sun sank below the horizon one evening, Jacob gathered stones and chose one as a pillow. He lay down beneath the canopy of stars, feeling the sharpness of the earth beneath his head and the heaviness of guilt pressing on his chest. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it opened into a vision unlike anything he had ever experienced. A great ladder stretched from the ground to the heavens, shining with a radiance he could not describe. Angels moved upon it, ascending and descending, carrying out the will of God. And at the top stood the Lord himself, wrapped in majesty, his voice rolling like thunder yet soft as mercy. "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac," he said. "The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and in you all families of the world shall be blessed. I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Jacob awoke trembling. The night felt alive with holy presence. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it," he whispered. Fear and awe washed over him as he touched the stone where his head had rested. He set it upright as a pillar and poured oil over it, consecrating the place. "This shall be God's house," he vowed. "And if God will be with me and bring me safely home again, then the Lord shall be my God." With renewed strength and a heart stirred by hope, Jacob resumed his journey. Though danger still lay ahead, he now walked under the promise of heaven. Days later, Jacob arrived near Haran, where shepherds gathered around a well closed by a large stone. Jacob greeted them and asked about Laban. As they spoke, he saw a young woman approaching with a flock of sheep. Her presence caught the light of the sun, and Jacob's breath paused. This was Rachel, Laban's daughter, and her beauty struck him with unexpected force. Determined to show strength and respect, Jacob stepped forward and rolled the heavy stone from the well by himself, an act that impressed the shepherds and Rachel alike. He watered her flock with care, then, overcome with emotion and relief at finding family in a distant land, he wept. Rachel ran home to tell her father, and soon Laban hurried to meet Jacob, embracing him warmly. "Surely you are my bone and my flesh," Laban said, welcoming him into his household. For the first time since leaving home, Jacob felt the comfort of belonging, though he could not yet see the challenges that awaited him. As he settled into Laban's home, Jacob began to work among the flocks, proving himself diligent, wise, and strong. Days turned into weeks, and Jacob's admiration for Rachel deepened into love, steady, genuine, and powerful enough to reshape the direction of his life. Laban noticed Jacob's devotion and his skill with the animals. One day he asked, "Tell me your wages. What shall your work be worth?" Jacob replied without hesitation, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban's eyes gleamed with opportunity as he agreed, though Jacob saw only love, not deception. 7 years passed as if they were mere days to Jacob, for his heart was fixed on Rachel. Every sunrise brought him closer to the moment he longed for, every sunset reminded him that his love was true and patient. Yet beneath Laban's warm hospitality lay calculation. He saw Jacob's devotion, his spiritual blessing, and his strength, and he intended to gain from it. Jacob remained unaware, his heart too full of anticipation to sense the shadows forming around him. When the 7 years ended, Jacob approached Laban and said, "Give me my wife, for my time is completed." A great wedding feast was prepared, filled with music, dancing, and celebration. But that night, under the veil of darkness and tradition, Laban deceived Jacob by giving him Leah, the older daughter. Jacob discovered the truth only in the morning light and confronted Laban with anguish burning in his voice. "What have you done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Laban met his anger with smooth reasoning. "It is not our custom to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week with Leah, and I will give you Rachel also, for another 7 years of labor." Jacob's heart twisted with betrayal, but his love for Rachel outweighed his fury. He agreed, though he knew the price of that decision would shape the rest of his life. And so Jacob continued his journey, not only across deserts and foreign lands, but through the unfolding trials of love, deception, and divine destiny. Though he had fled from his own deceit, he now tasted the bitterness of being deceived. Yet through it all, the promise God spoke at Bethel followed him like a guiding star. Jacob was learning that the road to becoming Israel, the father of a nation, would not be smooth or easy. But every hardship was shaping him, refining his faith, and preparing him for a future written by the hand of God himself. Jacob's years under Laban's roof unfolded in a whirlwind of labor, tension, and quiet longing. After the week of Leah's wedding had passed, Laban fulfilled his word and gave Rachel to Jacob also, and though Jacob finally held the woman he loved, his life became entangled in the complicated web of a household ruled by rivalry and deception. Leah, unloved and aching for affection, watched Jacob's heart lean toward Rachel, and Rachel, though dearly cherished, wrestled with the unfulfilled longing to bear children. The tent of Jacob echoed with whispered prayers, hidden tears, and the footsteps of a man walking the fine line between love and duty. Under Laban's roof, Jacob grew not only as a shepherd but as a man forced to reconcile his desires with the burdens placed upon him by marriage, family, and fate. The early months were marked by tension between the sisters. Leah, though given to Jacob by trickery, sought to gain her husband's heart. Rachel, though deeply loved, bore the weight of barrenness with increasing sorrow. God saw Leah's pain and opened her womb, granting her a son. "Now my husband will love me," she declared as she named him Reuben. But Jacob's affection did not shift, and Leah's heart ached anew. Soon she bore another son, Simeon, saying, "The Lord has heard that I am unloved." Still Jacob's gaze remained fixed on Rachel. Then came Levi, then Judah. Each child carried the cries of Leah's longing, the silent battles fought in the secrecy of her soul. But Jacob, though respectful, could not force his heart to change. His love for Rachel remained constant, and his family grew under the weight of two competing affections. Rachel's anguish deepened with every birth Leah celebrated. Jealousy twisted within her, driving her into desperation. One day she cried out to Jacob, "Give me children, or I die." Her voice trembled with years of suppressed pain. Jacob, weary from the emotional strain, responded sharply, "Am I in God's place, who has withheld children from you?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but determination replaced despair. She gave Jacob her maid Bilhah, saying, "She will bear children on my behalf." Bilhah bore Dan, then Naphtali, And Rachel felt a flicker of victory, saying, "With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed." But the rivalry had only intensified. Leah, seeing Rachel's strategy, gave Jacob her maid Zilpah, who bore Gad and Asher. The camp buzzed with new life, laughter of children, and the unspoken tension of two women battling for honor, affection, and destiny. Then, in a moment of grace, God remembered Rachel. She conceived and gave birth to Joseph, a child who would one day shape the fate of nations. Rachel's joy overflowed as she held her son for the first time. "May the Lord add to me another son," she whispered. Jacob looked upon Joseph with deep affection, seeing in him the fulfillment of years of longing and love. But even as his heart swelled with gratitude, Jacob knew his time in Laban's household must come to an end. 14 years had passed since he first arrived with nothing but a staff in hand. He had served faithfully, endured deceit, built a family, and grown in strength and wisdom. Now he longed to return to his father's land, to face the past and build his own future. Jacob approached Laban and said, "Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and children, for whom I have served you." But Laban, ever watchful, saw the prosperity Jacob brought to his household and resisted. "Name your wages," Laban said, "for I have learned that the Lord has blessed me because of you." Jacob, knowing Laban's nature, offered a proposal that seemed simple yet clever. He would keep only the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals from the flock, leaving the pure-colored ones for Laban. It sounded like a disadvantage, and Laban agreed quickly, thinking he had secured profit once more. But Jacob understood the laws of breeding and left the rest in God's hands. While Jacob worked tirelessly, Laban shifted the terms repeatedly, changing his wages again and again, trying to cheat him. Yet each time Laban schemed, God overturned his plans. The flocks increased in Jacob's favor. The strong animals bore speckled young, and the weak ones were born plain. Jacob separated his flocks wisely, growing stronger and wealthier. His household expanded with servants, livestock, and children. Jacob, who had once fled with nothing, now possessed abundance. But Laban's sons grew jealous, whispering that Jacob had taken what belonged to their father. The air thickened with resentment, and Jacob sensed the shift. One night, God spoke to Jacob in a dream. "Return to the land of your fathers, and I will be with you." Jacob knew the time had come. He called Rachel and Leah into the fields away from prying ears and explained Laban's deceit, the dreams God had shown him, and the growing hostility within the household. Rachel and Leah looked at each other, their rivalry momentarily forgotten. "Do we still have any portion in our father's house?" they asked. "All the wealth God has taken from our father belongs to us and our children. Do whatever God has said." For the first time, the two women stood united, not in competition, but in resolve to follow Jacob on the path God prepared. Jacob gathered his family and possessions quietly, determined to leave while Laban was away shearing sheep. The camp moved swiftly through the hills, the children bundled atop camels, the livestock driven steadily forward. A sense of urgency pulsed through every heartbeat. They were escaping not merely a household but years of manipulation and labor under a man who had shaped their fate for too long. Rachel, driven by a final surge of bitterness, secretly took her father's household idols before they fled, a decision that would later bring conflict and tension. 3 days later, Laban discovered their departure. Furious, he pursued them, traveling with men across harsh terrain. But during the night, God appeared to Laban in a dream, warning him, "Speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." When Laban finally caught up with Jacob, his anger clashed with the fear planted in his heart by God. The confrontation was tense, filled with accusations, denials, and the heavy weight of unspoken history. Yet in the end, the two men built a boundary stone as a witness between them, sealing a fragile peace. With the covenant made, Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren goodbye and returned home. Jacob stood watching until the dust settled on the horizon, knowing that the chapter under Laban's roof had finally closed. Jacob turned toward the path ahead, toward the land of Canaan, where unfinished business awaited him. He did not know what challenges lay before him, but he knew one truth with undeniable certainty: the God who had appeared at Bethel, who had watched over him through years of hardship, deceit, and labor, was still with him. And now, as Jacob stepped into the next chapter of his life, he carried not only a growing family and great wealth but a heart shaped by trials and strengthened by promise. Jacob left the boundary he set with Laban carrying not only the weight of years of labor but the anticipation of a long-awaited homecoming. The land of Canaan lay ahead like a distant memory, both comforting and threatening. Behind him was Laban's household and all its deception. Before him awaited Esau, the brother he had wronged so deeply. As Jacob walked, the desert wind pressed against him, whispering fears he had buried for 2 decades. Yet beneath the unease stirred a quiet hope. He was not returning as the young deceiver who fled in fear, but as a man transformed by hardship, blessing, and the faithful presence of God. With wives, children, and flocks surrounding him, Jacob stepped forward into a future that God alone had prepared. One day, as the camp moved steadily toward Canaan, Jacob lifted his eyes and saw something extraordinary: angels of God meeting him along the way. The sight filled him with awe, and he named the place Mahanaim, meaning 2 camps, recognizing that God's heavenly host traveled alongside his earthly family. The vision renewed Jacob's strength, yet it also reminded him of the confrontation that lay ahead. Esau. The name alone stirred old guilt and fresh fear. Jacob knew he could not enter the land without reconciling with the brother he had deceived. And so he sent messengers ahead to Seir, the land of Edom, with a humble message: "Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and servants. I send this message to find favor in your sight." The messengers returned quickly, their faces pale with news that struck Jacob like a blow. "Esau is coming to meet you," they said, "and 400 men are with him." Jacob's heart tightened. 400 men was not the escort of a welcoming brother, it was the march of a man ready for revenge. Panic rose within him, and Jacob divided the camp into 2 groups, saying, "If Esau attacks one camp, the other may escape." Yet even as he strategized, Jacob knew earthly plans alone were not enough. He fell to his knees and prayed, "O God of my father Abraham and Isaac, you who said to me, 'Return to your country and I will do you good,' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown. Deliver me from Esau, for I fear him. But you have promised that my descendants will be as the sand of the sea." After praying, Jacob prepared an enormous gift for Esau: hundreds of goats, rams, camels, cattle, and donkeys, divided into separate groups to be sent as waves of peace offerings. He instructed the servants carefully: "When Esau meets you and asks to whom these belong, say, They are your servant Jacob's. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he is behind us." Jacob hoped the gifts would soften Esau's heart or at least slow his anger. But even as he organized the caravans, a deeper turmoil grew within him. His entire future depended on the outcome of the approaching encounter. That night Jacob crossed the Jabbok River with his family and all he possessed, sending them ahead while he remained alone on the far bank. The solitude pressed in on him like a weight. 20 years of fear, guilt, and longing rose to the surface. In the stillness of night, Jacob wrestled not only with his past but with the man he had become. Suddenly a figure appeared in the darkness, a man who grappled with Jacob with the force of heaven itself. They wrestled until dawn, their struggle fierce and unrelenting. Sweat dripped from Jacob's brow, his muscles burned, yet he refused to yield. When the man saw that Jacob would not release him, he touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it instantly. Pain shot through Jacob's body, but still he clung. "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking," the man said. Jacob gasped, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered, confessing not just a name but a history of deception and striving. Then the man declared, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Jacob trembled as the words washed over him. He had wrestled with the divine. He had been broken to be made new. At dawn's first light, the stranger blessed him and vanished. Jacob named the place Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." Limping from his injury, Jacob crossed the river with a transformed identity, ready to face whatever awaited him. As Jacob looked up, dust rose on the horizon. Esau was approaching with his 400 men. Jacob positioned his family carefully, servants and their children first, then Leah and her children, and finally Rachel with Joseph. But he himself walked ahead of them all, bowing to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Each bow was a step of humility, repentance, and courage. For a moment, time froze. Esau strode forward, towering with strength, his eyes fixed on Jacob. Then, breaking every expectation, Esau ran, not with a sword, but with open arms. He embraced Jacob, fell on his neck, and wept. Jacob wept with him, overwhelmed by relief and grace. Years of bitterness dissolved in a single moment of brotherly compassion. Esau looked at the wives, children, and flocks surrounding Jacob. "What is all this camp I met?" he asked. Jacob replied, "It is to find favor in your sight." Esau shook his head and said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what is yours." But Jacob insisted, saying, "Please accept my present, for seeing your face is like seeing the face of God." Finally Esau accepted, sealing their reconciliation. Though Esau invited Jacob to travel with him, Jacob, cautious and wise, chose a slower path for the sake of his family. The brothers parted peacefully, each heading toward his own land, their relationship restored by divine mercy. Jacob continued toward Canaan, his steps slow due to his injury but his spirit strengthened by God's presence. He built shelters for his livestock and named the place Sukkot. Eventually, he arrived safely in Shechem, where he purchased land and built an altar, calling it El Elo Israel, God, the God of Israel. It was a declaration that the man who once ran from home as Jacob had returned as Israel, transformed by trials, guided by heaven, and anchored by the promise of God. After settling near the city of Shechem, Jacob believed he had finally found a moment of peace. The journey from Haran was behind him, the reconciliation with Esau complete, and the land of Canaan welcomed him once again. Jacob built an altar and called it El Elo Israel, declaring publicly that the God who guided him through every trial was his God forever. His household grew in stability, the children played among the pastures, and Rachel and Leah tended to their tents. For a time, it seemed the storm of his life had calmed. But the land of promise was not free from danger, and the peace Jacob longed for would soon be shattered in ways he never imagined. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, was a curious young woman with a gentle spirit. She longed to see the land and meet the daughters of the region, and one day she ventured into the city of Shechem. Her visit was innocent, born of youthful curiosity, but it placed her in the path of harm. Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the land, saw her and was struck by her beauty. Consumed by desire, he seized her and violated her. The act was brutal and dishonorable, a wound not only to Dinah but to Jacob's entire household. Yet afterward, Shechem claimed to love her, speaking tenderly to her and begging his father to secure her as his wife. But no soft words could erase the violence he had committed. When Jacob first heard of the incident, his heart froze. Yet he remained silent until his sons returned from the fields. His silence was not indifference but shock, confusion, and fear for what such a crime might provoke among the inhabitants of the land. When Simeon and Levi heard what had been done to their sister, fury lit their eyes like a blazing fire. "He has done a disgraceful thing," they said, "for such a thing must not be done." Their anger swelled into a resolve that quickly hardened into a plan for revenge, though they told no one, not even Jacob. Meanwhile, Hamor came to Jacob to negotiate a marriage between Shechem and Dinah. He spoke confidently, offering peace, intermarriage, and shared prosperity. Shechem himself joined the plea, insisting he would pay any bride price, no matter how high. Jacob's sons, listening carefully, gave an answer cloaked in deceit. They said, "We cannot give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace. But if you and all your males become circumcised, we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves." Their words sounded like a gesture toward unity, but their hearts pulsed with a very different intention. Hamor and Shechem agreed eagerly and returned to their city, convincing the men that joining with Jacob's powerful household would bring wealth and security. The men listened, and soon every male in the city was circumcised. As they lay in pain on the third day, Simeon and Levi acted. Taking swords in their hands, they entered the city and struck down every male, including Hamor and Shechem. They rescued Dinah from Shechem's house and carried her out. After the slaughter, the rest of Jacob's sons descended upon the city, plundering it, sheep, oxen, donkeys, wealth, and taking the women and children captive. When Jacob heard what his sons had done, his sorrow turned to horror. He confronted Simeon and Levi, saying, "You have brought trouble on me, making me obnoxious to the inhabitants of the land. If they gather against me, I and my household will be destroyed." But Simeon and Levi answered with fiery conviction, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" Their words were full of righteous rage, yet they failed to see the consequences of their unchecked vengeance. Jacob looked at his sons, not with anger alone but with deep grief. He knew their violence had endangered the entire family, and he feared the surrounding nations would rise against them. The camp stirred with unrest in the days that followed. Jacob, exhausted and distressed, sought God for guidance. The Lord spoke to him, saying, "Go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar to God who appeared to you when you fled from Esau." The command carried both mercy and urgency. Bethel was the place where Jacob had first encountered God in a dream, the place where heaven opened before him. Now, after the bloodshed at Shechem, God called Jacob back to the place of promise, identity, and renewal. Jacob understood that before they could approach Bethel, his household had to be cleansed of the corruption that had seeped into it. He gathered his family and servants and said, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourselves and change your garments. Then we will arise and go to Bethel." His words cut through the turmoil like a sharpening blade. The household surrendered their idols, earrings, and charms, symbols of foreign worship gathered from Shechem or inherited from years past. Jacob buried them under a large oak near Shechem, sealing them beneath the earth, leaving behind the weight of idolatry and violence. As the camp moved toward Bethel, the fear of God fell upon the surrounding cities. Though Jacob had feared retaliation, none pursued them. God himself shielded them, proving again that his presence was the true source of Jacob's safety. The journey was quiet and heavy, marked by reflection and the hope of new beginnings. At Bethel, Jacob built an altar and called the place El Bethel, for it was there that God had revealed himself when Jacob fled from Esau many years before. The moment felt like coming home to the heart of God. But even at Bethel, sorrow mingled with blessing. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under an oak below the camp. The loss struck Jacob deeply, for Deborah was like family, a tender remnant of the home he left so long ago. As Jacob mourned, God appeared to him once more. This time the message was clear and powerful: "Your name is Jacob, but you shall not be called Jacob any longer. Israel shall be your name." God reaffirmed the covenant, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you." Jacob set up a pillar, poured out a drink offering, and worshipped with reverence. From Bethel, Jacob journeyed onward. Though the crisis in Shechem had left scars, it also marked a turning point. The violence of his sons, the vulnerability of his daughter, the fear of retaliation, all had driven Jacob back into the arms of the God who had chosen him, protected him, and renamed him. He walked forward not merely as a man escaping danger but as Israel, the one who wrestled with God and prevailed, called to lead a nation shaped through trials, mercy, and divine purpose. As Jacob and his household departed from Bethel, the air carried a mix of hope and heaviness. God had renewed his covenant with Jacob, reaffirmed his name as Israel, and blessed him with a promise that would echo through generations. Yet even with divine reassurance, life's trials still waited on the road ahead. The caravan moved south toward Ephrath, their animals kicking up faint trails of dust as the family pressed forward in steady rhythm. Among them, Rachel rode with quiet anticipation. She was pregnant once more, and though her body felt strained, her heart overflowed with joy at the thought of another child, a gift she had prayed for through years of tears and longing. Joseph rode near her, protective and attentive, often glancing back to ensure she was comfortable. Rachel smiled at him, cherishing every moment with her beloved firstborn, unaware of how fate would soon turn. The journey grew more difficult as the terrain shifted into rugged paths and uneven hills. Rachel felt the pressure of the child increasing with each passing day. Pain came in waves, subtle at first, then sharper, deeper, impossible to ignore. By the time they neared Ephrath, she knew the hour of birth had arrived. The camp halted. Servants hurried to pitch a tent, women gathered around her, and Jacob paced outside, heart pounding with worry. Rachel's cries rose into the evening air, raw and heart-wrenching, echoing across the lonely fields. Unlike Joseph's birth, this labor was not brief nor gentle. It came like a storm, fierce and relentless. Inside the tent, the midwife wiped Rachel's brow and spoke softly, trying to calm her. Rachel struggled for breath, her face pale with exhaustion. The pain intensified with every moment, twisting through her like a fire she could not escape. Her hands gripped the blankets tightly as she fought to bring her child into the world. Outside, Jacob listened helplessly, each cry striking him like a blow. He remembered the years Rachel had suffered barrenness, the prayers she had whispered, the tears she had shed. He remembered her joy when Joseph was born. Now he prayed with all his heart that God would spare her. As the hours passed, Rachel's strength waned. The midwife leaned close and whispered urgently to her, "Do not fear, for you have another son." Her words offered a spark of comfort, but the cost of this birth was draining the life from Rachel's body. She looked upon her newborn child, tears filling her eyes, not only from pain, but from love, fierce and deep. She reached out, touching his tiny face. Breath trembled against her lips as she whispered a name, "Benoni, son of my sorrow." The words carried the weight of her final moments, etched with both despair and tenderness. Jacob rushed into the tent the moment he sensed the shifting air, the sudden stillness that follows tragedy. He knelt beside Rachel, taking her hand as her breath weakened. He called her name, but her eyes had begun to fade. As her spirit slipped away, Jacob felt a part of himself break with her. He held the child gently, tears streaming down his face. Whispering through grief, he renamed the baby Benjamin, "Son of my right hand," a name of hope and honor to replace the shadow of sorrow. It was Jacob's final act of love for Rachel, a way to carry her memory forward without letting tragedy define her son's life. The camp mourned deeply. Wives, children, and servants wept openly, for Rachel had been loved by many. Joseph collapsed in tears, clutching his little brother, struggling to comprehend the loss that pierced him so young. Jacob prepared for burial with trembling hands. There was no city nearby, no ancestral tomb, so he buried Rachel along the road to Ephrath. He set a pillar over her grave, a simple yet enduring monument that would stand for generations. The place would later be known as Bethlehem, a name tied to both sorrow and hope, for from Rachel's line would one day come kings, and eventually the Messiah himself. Jacob lingered at her grave long after the others had moved on, the wind brushing against his robes as though trying to console him. Memories washed over him, Rachel at the well, Rachel's laughter, Rachel's tears, Rachel's love. She had been the first woman he ever truly desired, the one he had worked 14 years to marry, the one who filled his heart in ways no one else ever had. Losing her left a void that nothing could fill. Yet Jacob knew he could not remain in grief forever. Many children depended on him now, including the newborn Benjamin. Though sorrow consumed him, he rose, strengthened by the God who had carried him through every hardship. The journey resumed with a subdued spirit. Rachel's absence was a constant shadow, yet her memory traveled with them in Benjamin's wide, curious eyes and Joseph's renewed protectiveness. Jacob, though wounded, continued to lead, leaning heavily on his staff and the promises God had spoken. The family moved southward until they reached the Tower of Eder, a place where shepherds watched their flocks. There Jacob camped, gathering his strength and guiding his family in quiet reflection. Life did not pause for sorrow, and he learned once again that even in heartbreak, God's faithfulness remained steadfast. Jacob often watched Benjamin sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with fragile breaths. The infant's presence softened Jacob's grief, reminding him that God had given him one final gift through Rachel. Joseph, too, became fiercely attached to his younger brother, sensing in him a living piece of the mother he had lost. The family drew closer, united not only by blood but by shared pain and the resilience forged through loss. Through the shadows of mourning, God continued to prepare Jacob for the unfolding destiny of his household, a destiny tied not only to sorrow but to a lineage of kings, prophets, and an everlasting covenant. As the camp settled near Eder, Jacob lifted his eyes to the horizon. The same sky under which he had once fled from Esau, wrestled with God, and been renamed Israel. His heart carried scars, yet his spirit held firm to the promises spoken at Bethel. Life, with all its storms and blessings, continued its march forward. Rachel's final journey had ended, but Jacob's journey, and the story of Israel, pressed on, guided by the God who turns mourning into strength and sorrow into purpose. After the sorrow of Rachel's death, Jacob's household moved forward slowly, each step heavy with lingering grief. The camp near the Tower of Eder became a place of fragile healing as Jacob tended to Benjamin. Joseph watched over his younger brother with fierce devotion, and the other children adjusted to life without Rachel's gentle presence. Yet beneath the surface of mourning, the fractures within the family, long hidden and often ignored, began to widen. Jealousy, rivalry, and unresolved tensions stirred like embers beneath ash. Among Jacob's sons, none felt the shift more intensely than Reuben, the firstborn of Leah. As the eldest, he lived with the weight of responsibility yet carried the bitterness of never being the son his father truly favored. In this quiet period of transition, a single impulsive act from Reuben would forever alter his place within the family. Jacob spent long hours grieving Rachel, often dwelling in silence, holding Benjamin or staring across the plains where the wind stirred the grass like distant waves. His deep sorrow created a distance between him and the rest of the household, a void the sons did not know how to bridge. Reuben, feeling the burden of leadership fall upon him, sought ways to assert his importance. But beneath his attempts to appear strong, he struggled with insecurity, the knowledge that Jacob had always preferred Rachel and her sons over the children of Leah. The favoritism Jacob never intended to display still rippled through the family like a quiet wound. Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, whom Jacob had taken as a concubine per ancient custom, remained in the household, tending to Benjamin and assisting Jacob in his grief. Her presence near Jacob stirred complicated emotions within the camp, especially for Reuben. To him, Bilhah represented Rachel, a rival to his mother Leah, and a reminder of the love Jacob had poured into Rachel's side of the family. Reuben's resentment simmered, not only against his father's favoritism but against the hierarchy of affection woven through their home. He felt overshadowed, neglected, and increasingly desperate to assert himself as the rightful firstborn. In a moment of reckless impulse, driven by anger and a misguided desire to elevate his status, Reuben went into Bilhah's tent and lay with her. Whether it was an act of rebellion, an attempt to claim dominance, or simply an outburst of confused frustration, the deed was a grave offense. In the culture of their time, sleeping with a father's concubine was not merely immoral, it was a symbolic challenge to the father's authority, a declaration of supremacy, a claim to inheritance. Reuben may not have fully understood the magnitude of what he had done, but the impact rippled immediately through the household. The incident could not remain hidden for long. Though Reuben attempted to act as though nothing had happened, servants whispered, the atmosphere changed, and word eventually reached Jacob. When Jacob learned what his firstborn had done, he was struck not with explosive anger but with deep, bitter disappointment. The scriptures later say simply, Israel heard of it. Yet behind those few words lies a storm of grief, betrayal, and disillusionment. Jacob had already endured deception from Laban, violence from his sons at Shechem, and the heartbreaking loss of Rachel. Now his own firstborn had committed an act that shattered trust at its core. Jacob chose silence, but it was not the silence of uncertainty, it was the silence of painful clarity. He did not confront Reuben immediately, nor did he punish him on the spot. Instead, Jacob carried the weight of the betrayal in his heart, waiting for the day he would speak the truth openly. Reuben, sensing his father's distance, felt the tension growing but did not know how to restore what had been broken. His attempt to assert authority had instead stripped him of the honor he sought. Meanwhile, the camp around them continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the deep wound spreading beneath the surface. Joseph, growing stronger and wiser each day, watched over Benjamin with unwavering devotion. Leah and Rachel's maidservants worked quietly. The other sons tended the flocks, unaware that Reuben's disgrace would soon have consequences reaching far beyond the moment itself. Jacob, though burdened, pressed forward, trying to guide his family toward stability. The household eventually broke camp and continued their journey southward, each step drawing them closer to Hebron, where Isaac still lived. When Jacob finally arrived at his father's home, he was welcomed into the same land where Abraham and Isaac had walked, prayed, and received the promises of God. The return to Hebron stirred memories of Jacob's youth, deceiving Esau, fleeing from home, dreaming of the latter at Bethel. Now he returned not as the young man who ran in fear but as Israel, the patriarch of a large and complicated family. Isaac, old and nearly blind, was nearing the end of his days. The reunion between father and son, though likely quiet and tender, held deep significance. Jacob had longed to see his father again, and Isaac had waited many years for the son he once feared he would never embrace. Not long after Jacob's return, Isaac breathed his last. At the age of 180, he died and was gathered to his people. In a moment rich with healing, Esau and Jacob, once torn apart by rivalry, stood side by side to bury their father in the family tomb. Their shared grief united them once more, but beneath the peace of that moment, the consequences of Reuben's action lingered quietly, waiting for the day Jacob would speak judgment. Though Isaac's death marked the end of one generation, Jacob's household was entering a new era, one that would soon be defined by Joseph's dreams, the jealousy of his brothers, and the unfolding destiny of the tribes of Israel. But before those events could shape the future, the stain of Reuben's disgrace remained. One day, when Jacob blessed his sons before his own death, he finally spoke the truth to Reuben, unstable as water, you shall not excel. The birthright of the firstborn would pass to Joseph's line, a consequence rooted in the impulsive act Reuben committed during their journey. Thus, the moment Reuben sought to elevate himself became the moment that diminished him. The eldest son, meant to carry strength and leadership, lost his place through a single rash decision. Yet even this failure became part of the larger story God was writing, a story where human weakness is woven into divine purpose and where the lineage of Israel would grow through grace, discipline, and redemption. Esau, the brother Jacob once feared and later embraced, had long since established his own household and identity apart from the line of promise. While Jacob carried the covenant given to Abraham and Isaac, Esau became the father of a nation in his own right, a people shaped by rugged landscapes, fierce independence, and the strength that had defined Esau from his youth. After Jacob settled again in Canaan, news of Esau's growing family and influence traveled through the region, reminding all who heard it that the brother once wronged had not been left behind. His legacy flourished in ways that revealed God's faithfulness even beyond the chosen line. Although Esau did not inherit the covenant, God had blessed him greatly, allowing him to become the ancestor of the Edomites, a nation that would stand alongside Israel with both tension and kinship woven into their history. Esau had taken wives from among the Canaanites, Adah, Oholibamah, and Basemath, and through them he bore sons who would rise to become chiefs and leaders. His family grew quickly, and the land of Canaan could not support both his wealth and Jacob's. Their livestock, servants, and herds pressed against the limits of the fields and water sources, stirring conflict among the shepherds. Yet rather than allow strife to grow again between the brothers, Esau made a decision rooted in both wisdom and independence. He relocated his entire household to the hill country of Seir, a land of steep cliffs, caves, and rugged beauty. It was a place fit for a man of the wild, a place where Esau could thrive without constraint. In that territory, Esau became known as Edom, and the name would mark his descendants for generations. The land of Seir soon echoed with the sounds of Esau's prosperity. His sons, Eliphaz, Reuel, Jush, Jalem, and Korah, became the pillars of clans that expanded into chiefs of various tribes. Eliphaz, born to Adah, fathered Taman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenas. Through a concubine named Timnah, Eliphaz also fathered Amalek, whose descendants would later become fierce adversaries of Israel in the generations to come. Reuel, the son of Basemath, gave rise to Naath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah, forming their own clans that settled across the land. Oholibamah's sons, Jush, Jalem, and Korah, added their strength to the growing nation. The people of Seir recognized the rising influence of Esau's house and wove themselves into its lineage through alliances, marriages, and shared governance. Before Esau settled in Seir, the land had been inhabited by the Horites, a people who lived in the mountains and caves, skilled in mining and trade. But as Esau's tribes grew in number and strength, they gradually displaced the Horites and took their territory. The chiefs of the Horites, Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishan, Ezer, and Dishan, either merged with Esau's line through marriage or were overshadowed by the expanding Edomite clans. Over time, the identity of Seir blended with the name of Edom, marking the region as the domain of Esau's descendants. Their authority became recognized not only in the land of Seir but throughout surrounding regions, as caravans of merchants, travelers, and nomads acknowledged the leadership of Edom's chiefs. The rise of Edomite kings would later precede the era when Israel had kings of their own. Long before Saul or David sat on a throne, The land of Edom was ruled by powerful leaders such as Bela son of Beer, Jobab son of Zerah, and Husham of Taman. Their reigns were marked by strength, trade, and influence, forging Edom into a nation that commanded respect. Though the Bible does not describe Esau as a king, his legacy laid the foundation for a monarchy that Israel would one day confront, ally with, fear, and overcome. The political landscape of the region shifted with each generation, yet Edom remained a strong presence, shaped by the endurance and determination inherited from Esau. Despite their shared lineage, the relationship between Israel and Edom would be filled with tension. The rivalry that began in the womb of Rebekah echoed through generations, manifesting in border disputes, political conflicts, and battles. But there were also moments of kinship and respect. When Israel journeyed from Egypt toward the Promised Land, they requested passage through Edom's territory, though the Edomites refused. Later, King David subdued Edom, but the Edomites regained their independence in subsequent centuries. Though conflict marked much of their relationship, the two nations never ceased to be bound by blood. The story of Jacob and Esau lived on in the interactions between their descendants, sometimes as brothers, sometimes as adversaries, always connected by their shared ancestry. Jacob's family often spoke of Esau's prosperity, especially as news traveled from caravans and travelers passing through the land. Though Jacob carried the covenant, he never denied the strength and blessing of Esau's line. He knew that God had promised blessing to both sons, though in different ways, and he marveled at how Esau had carved out a nation from the rugged hills. His sons listened with mixed feelings, some with respect, others with indifference, and others with curiosity about the distant relatives they had never met. Joseph, in particular, listened with interest, recognizing that the world beyond their tents stretched wide and full of nations God intended to shape according to his will. Esau himself grew older, seasoned by life in the mountains of Seir. His once fiery temper mellowed into the dignity of a patriarch. He carried the memories of his youth, losing the birthright, losing the blessing, hunting in the fields, reconciling with Jacob. Though he had once burned with anger, he no longer held bitterness toward his brother. Instead, he embraced the life God had given him, taking pride in the children and grandchildren who surrounded him. Esau's name, once tied to impulsiveness and sorrow, became revered among the Edomites as the founder of their nation. The record of Esau's descendants serves not only as a genealogy but as a testament to God's faithfulness beyond the chosen line. Though Jacob received the covenant, God blessed Esau with abundance, strength, and a nation that would stand for centuries. Through Esau, God preserved a parallel story of power, identity, and legacy, one that would later interact with Israel in ways both challenging and meaningful. As Jacob's household prepared to enter a new season marked by Joseph's dreams and the unfolding drama among the brothers, the history of Esau's descendants stood as a reminder that God's purposes extend beyond a single family. Esau's story, though separate from the covenant, remained intertwined with the destiny of Israel. For the brothers who once fought in their mother's womb had become the fathers of nations, nations destined to shape the history of God's people, each according to the plan he ordained before they were born. Joseph had grown into a young man whose presence seemed to brighten the camp wherever he walked. At 17, he possessed a quiet strength and a perceptive mind, traits that made him stand out among his brothers even without Jacob's visible affection. But it was his character, gentle yet firm, curious yet humble, that set him apart. The household often saw him tending the flocks with diligence, assisting the younger boys, or listening intently at Jacob's side as his father recounted the stories of Abraham and Isaac. Joseph absorbed every word, treasuring the heritage of faith that had shaped their family. Yet this growing wisdom and purity only deepened the tension with his brothers, who viewed him as both favored and overly righteous. The coat of many colors Jacob had given him remained a constant reminder of their father's preference, stirring envy that smoldered beneath every interaction. The brothers labored in the fields with a gruff camaraderie born of shared hardship, but Joseph's presence often disrupted their unity. When he reported their misconduct or carelessness to Jacob, their resentment sharpened. They accused him of trying to elevate himself, though Joseph spoke only what he believed to be right. As the days passed, the tension between them lingered like a storm gathering strength. Even so, Joseph remained unaware of the depth of their bitterness, his heart uncluttered by suspicion. He simply sought to honor his father and walk faithfully before God, not realizing how different that path would make him. One night, Joseph lay down to sleep beneath the spread of stars that filled the sky above Canaan, a tapestry of light that had guided his ancestors and spoken of promises stretching through generations. As he drifted into rest, a dream took hold of his mind, vivid, powerful, unlike anything he had ever experienced. He found himself standing in a field with his brothers, each of them binding sheaves of grain. Suddenly Joseph's sheaf rose upright, towering higher than the rest. One by one, the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed before his, acknowledging his prominence. The image burned into Joseph's spirit, leaving him breathless when he awoke. At dawn, unable to contain the wonder of what he had seen, Joseph went to his brothers and told them the dream. His voice held no pride, only honest amazement, but the brothers heard something different. "Listen to the dream I had," he said eagerly. "We were binding sheaves in the field, when my sheaf stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed down before mine." Joseph did not yet understand the depth of meaning behind the vision, but his brothers heard an offense, a claim to authority that struck at their pride. Rage flickered in their eyes as they asked, "Will you indeed reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" Their bitterness intensified, for now Joseph's innocence seemed to carry a threat they could no longer ignore. Jacob, too, heard news of the dream when the brothers reported it in frustration, but he said nothing. He had learned through his own life that God often spoke through dreams. The memory of the ladder reaching to heaven at Bethel had never faded. Though Jacob did not fully understand Joseph's dream, he pondered it silently, storing it deep in his heart, curious whether God was beginning to raise Joseph for a purpose none of them yet understood. Another night passed, and Joseph dreamed again, this time with even greater intensity. He saw the heavens themselves bending toward him. In the vision, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down before him, majestic and solemn. Joseph woke with awe and fear mingled in his chest, sensing that something beyond human reason was unfolding. Once more he shared the dream, this time with both his father and brothers present. "I have dreamed another dream," he said. "The sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me." His words filled the air like a spark falling onto dry timber. Jacob, startled by the imagery, rebuked Joseph gently, "Will your mother and I and your brothers truly come and bow to the ground before you?" His voice held a mix of confusion and concern, for the dream implied a destiny that seemed almost impossible. Yet though Jacob spoke sharply, his heart stirred. These were no ordinary visions. He sensed the hand of God moving, though in ways beyond his comprehension. The brothers, however, were inflamed with jealousy. The idea that Joseph, youngest among them except Benjamin, might one day rise above them was intolerable. Their envy hardened further, turning their companionship into cold distance. Despite their resentment, Joseph continued his tasks faithfully. The dreams did not make him arrogant; instead, they filled him with a strange humility, as though he sensed that the visions did not belong to him but to God. He pondered them quietly, unsure of what the future held. Meanwhile, Jacob instructed his older sons to take the flocks to graze near Shechem, a region they knew well. Days passed, and Jacob grew uneasy when he heard no news of them. Concerned, he called Joseph and said, "Go now and see if all is well with your brothers and the flocks. Then bring word back to me." Joseph obeyed without hesitation, setting out on the long walk north. Along the way, he crossed hills and valleys that echoed with distant memories of Rachel, of his childhood, and of Jacob's many trials. He approached Shechem with determination, looking for tracks or signs of his brothers. A man found him wandering in the fields and asked what he sought. "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph replied. The man told him they had moved toward Dothan. Joseph thanked him and continued his journey, unaware that each step drew him closer to a plot formed by envy and hatred. While he traveled, his brothers saw him approaching from afar. The coat of many colors stood out even at a distance, stirring their fury anew. They gathered together and whispered among themselves, "Behold, the dreamer approaches." Their voices grew dark as they plotted to kill him and be rid of the dreams they so despised. They reasoned that if Joseph died, his visions would die with him, and the threat of his imagined authority would finally end. But deep within their hearts, fear battled with rage, for they sensed that Joseph's dreams carried something divine. Yet their jealousy pushed them to the brink of violence, ready to destroy their own brother in a moment of blind passion. Unaware of the danger awaiting him, Joseph walked steadily toward them, carrying nothing but a willing heart and the innocence of one who believed the best of others. As he approached the crest of the hill, his fate moved into motion, setting the stage for the extraordinary story God would write through betrayal, suffering, and redemption. This moment, the beginning of Joseph's descent and eventual rise, started with dreams that revealed his destiny before he could ever understand the cost. The moment Joseph appeared on the distant ridge, his multicolored coat catching the sunlight, the simmering resentment within his brothers ignited into something far more dangerous than jealousy. They had spent days in the fields at Dothan, working under the relentless heat and growing increasingly bitter as they remembered his dreams, dreams that placed him above them, dreams their father seemed to ponder with troubling interest. Now, seeing Joseph approach alone, their thoughts turned dark. The coat Jacob had given him, meant as a symbol of love, only deepened their rage. It felt like a banner announcing Joseph as superior, as chosen, as favored in ways they could never attain. And so, as Joseph drew closer, their whispers turned into a conspiracy that would change the course of his life. Reuben, the eldest, was the first to speak when they saw him coming. His heart was heavy with the guilt of his past wrongdoing and the pressure of being the eldest brother. Yet even he could not silence the anger swelling among them. The others muttered, "Behold, the dreamer comes." Their voices carried a mocking tone, echoing the resentment that had grown day by day. Joseph's dreams had felt like insults to them, messages that implied they would one day kneel before him. and as they watched him descend the hill, they felt an opportunity before them, one that could erase those dreams forever. "Now come," one of them said, "let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say a wild beast has devoured him. Then we shall see what becomes of his dreams." The words hung in the air like poison. Their anger had grown so fierce that even the thought of murder no longer seemed unthinkable. Yet beneath the fury was a familiar human weakness, the desire to destroy anything that threatened their pride or revealed their own flaws. Joseph, innocent and trusting, represented a goodness they could not understand, and it infuriated them. But Reuben, though conflicted, could not allow his brothers to shed blood. Hearing their plan, he intervened with urgency. "Let us not take his life," he said. "Do not shed blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." His voice carried both authority and desperation. Reuben intended to return later, rescue Joseph, and restore him safely to Jacob. Perhaps he hoped this act would redeem him from the disgrace that had cost him his father's respect. The others, not suspecting his true intentions, agreed to the compromise. It still removed Joseph, still silenced the dreams, and spared them the guilt of bloodshed. Joseph approached with no suspicion, smiling as he neared his brothers. He was eager to fulfill his father's instructions and hoped to bring back good news about their welfare. But the moment he reached them, the tone of the gathering changed. Instead of greeting him, the brothers surrounded him with hostile glares. Before Joseph could speak, they seized him roughly. Fear flooded his eyes as he struggled to understand their sudden aggression. "What are you doing?" he cried, but his voice was swallowed by their rage. They tore the coat from his shoulders, the symbol of Jacob's love, ripping it away as though removing everything they resented about him. The coat, once a treasured gift, now lay on the dusty ground like a fallen banner. The brothers forced Joseph toward the edge of a deep, dry pit, a cistern carved into the earth, empty and steep. With a final shove, they pushed him inside. Joseph fell hard against the stone bottom, bruised and shaken, calling out to them in confusion and terror. Above him, their faces appeared as shadows against the bright sky, but they did not respond with compassion or remorse. Instead, they turned away from the pit and sat down to eat, as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Their hearts had become hardened by envy, and Joseph's pleas echoed off the walls of the pit unheard. As they ate, a caravan appeared on the horizon, Ishmaelite traders traveling from Gilead on their way to Egypt. Their camels carried spices, balm, and myrrh for trade. The sight of the caravan stirred Judah's mind with a new idea. Unlike Reuben, who had slipped away temporarily, Judah saw opportunity rather than salvation. "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood?" he asked. "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. He is our brother, our own flesh." His words sounded almost merciful, but beneath them lay cold calculation. Selling Joseph would rid them of him without the guilt of murder, and they would gain silver in the process. The brothers agreed quickly, their earlier rage now transformed into greedy resolve. When the traders approached, Joseph was dragged out of the pit, terrified and pleading. His brothers ignored his cries as they bargained with the Ishmaelites. For 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave, they handed Joseph over. The traders bound him and led him away toward the distant road. Joseph looked back at his brothers with disbelief and anguish, unable to comprehend the betrayal. His heart shattered as the familiar hills of Canaan faded behind him. He had left home that morning as a beloved son. Now he walked toward Egypt as a slave, his future uncertain and frightening. Reuben returned shortly afterward, intending to rescue Joseph, but when he looked into the pit and found it empty, he tore his clothes in anguish. "The boy is gone," he cried. He ran to his brothers, demanding an explanation, but they had already accepted what had happened. Reuben's despair went unanswered. All that remained was to craft a lie convincing enough to deceive Jacob. The brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's torn coat into the blood. They brought it to Jacob, saying, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized it instantly. His heart broke as he cried, "It is my son's robe. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." He tore his garments in agony and mourned for many days. No words of comfort from his children could ease his sorrow. He refused to be consoled, saying, "I will go down to the grave mourning my son." Meanwhile, Joseph was carried far from his home, unaware of his father's grief, unaware of the destiny God was shaping through his suffering. The brothers believed they had silenced Joseph's dreams, but in truth, the dreams were only beginning to unfold. Behind the betrayal stood a divine plan far greater than envy, fear, or human intent, a plan that would one day save nations. Joseph walked with heavy steps as the Ishmaelite caravan carried him farther and farther from the familiar hills of Canaan toward the vast and foreign land of Egypt. Every sound, the creak of the camels' saddles, the murmurs of traders, the rhythmic crunch of sand beneath their feet, reminded him that he was no longer a beloved son but a slave. The sun beat down on him relentlessly, drying the tears that had traced down his cheeks. His wrists ached from the ropes, but a deeper pain consumed him, the betrayal of his own brothers. Despite his fear, Joseph held on to the words he had heard from Jacob all his life, "The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob watches over his people." Though abandoned by those he trusted, Joseph believed he was not abandoned by God. When the caravan finally reached Egypt, Joseph found himself overwhelmed by the sights and sounds of a world unlike anything he had known. Towering walls carved with strange symbols, soldiers with spears and polished shields, marketplaces bursting with bright fabrics, spices, and crowds from every corner of the ancient world, all of it filled Joseph with awe and uncertainty. The traders led him to the slave market, where buyers examined men like livestock. Joseph's heart pounded as he waited, wondering what kind of fate awaited him in this powerful land. Among the buyers that day was a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, a man of authority, discipline, and influence. His eyes scanned the slaves with practiced judgment until they rested on Joseph. Something in Joseph's demeanor, his posture, his intelligence, perhaps the dignity that had not yet been crushed from him, caught Potiphar's attention. After brief negotiations, Joseph was purchased and brought into Potiphar's household. Though Joseph did not know it yet, this moment marked the first step in a divine plan that would lift him from slavery to greatness. Potiphar's home was orderly, efficient, and filled with servants of many backgrounds. Joseph was assigned simple tasks at first, carrying water, assisting with livestock, organizing supplies. Yet everything he touched prospered. Though far from home, Joseph held firmly to the teachings of his father, working with integrity and honoring God in every task. Potiphar soon noticed the excellence of the young Hebrew slave. No matter the job, Joseph performed it with diligence, wisdom, and humility. The household began to thrive in ways Potiphar had never experienced. Recognizing that the God of Joseph was with him, Potiphar gradually entrusted him with greater responsibility. Within a short time, Joseph rose to become overseer of Potiphar's entire household. Businesses flourished, herds multiplied, and the management of servants operated smoothly under Joseph's leadership. Potiphar placed everything he owned in Joseph's hands, concerned only with the food he ate. Joseph's success was not a result of personal ambition but of quiet faithfulness. His heart remained rooted in the God of his fathers, even in a foreign land. Still, though Joseph served with excellence, he could not silence the ache of longing for Jacob, for Benjamin, for the life stolen from him by betrayal. Yet he carried on, trusting that God had not forgotten him. Joseph had grown into a strong, handsome young man, and Potiphar's wife soon took notice of him. Her gaze lingered on him each time he passed through the house. She was a woman accustomed to power, used to having her desires fulfilled without question. The more she observed Joseph's strength and grace, the more she desired him. One day, when they were alone, she approached him boldly and said, "Lie with me." Her voice was confident, expecting compliance. But Joseph recoiled, not with anger but with conviction. "My master has withheld nothing from me except you," he replied. "How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" His refusal only fueled her desire. Day after day, she pursued him, cornering him with her advances, whispering temptations, trying to break his resolve. Joseph avoided her whenever possible, keeping his distance and focusing on his duties. But one day, when none of the servants were nearby, she seized him by his garment and repeated her demand. Joseph, desperate to escape, pulled away so forcefully that the garment slipped from his hands as he fled the house. Potiphar's wife, humiliated by his rejection, screamed for the servants and spun a lie born of anger and wounded pride. Holding Joseph's garment, she accused him of trying to seduce her. When Potiphar returned, she repeated the accusation. Though Potiphar knew Joseph's character, he could not ignore such a charge. His anger burned, not necessarily at Joseph, but at the chaos this situation brought into his home. Joseph was thrown into the king's prison, a dark and oppressive place meant for the worst offenders. Yet even here, God was with him. The despair Joseph felt was deep, but not hopeless. He had been robbed of his freedom again, betrayed again, yet he clung to the belief that God remained near. In the prison, Joseph's integrity shone as brightly as it had in Potiphar's house. The chief jailer soon noticed his wisdom, discipline, and calm spirit. Gradually, he entrusted Joseph with oversight of the other prisoners, allowing him responsibilities far greater than most captives would ever receive. Under Joseph's care, the prison became more orderly, and the weight of suffering grew lighter for those around him. Though he lived behind locked doors, Joseph's spirit remained free, anchored by faith, strengthened by the belief that God had a purpose even in this dark place. Joseph did not know what lay ahead. He did not know that his dreams would one day become reality or that the chains around his wrists were steps leading him toward destiny. But he knew one truth: God was with him. And in the depths of Egypt's darkest prison, that truth was enough to keep hope alive. Joseph's days in the dim, stone corridors of the prison passed slowly, yet he carried himself with the same quiet dignity he had shown in Potiphar's house. Even in chains, he did not forget the God of his fathers, nor did he let despair consume him. The chief jailer soon recognized Joseph's character and entrusted him with oversight of the other prisoners. Though the iron bars and darkness spoke of confinement, Joseph became a pillar of stability in the midst of suffering. He listened to the prisoners' troubles, settled disputes, and ensured they received food and care. His presence brought a strange sense of order to the place, as though God's favor followed him even into the shadows. One day, the prison doors clanged open, and 2 new prisoners were led inside. These were not ordinary men, they were officials of Pharaoh himself. One was the chief cupbearer, the trusted servant responsible for tasting the king's wine to ensure it was safe. The other was the chief baker, overseer of all the bread served at Pharaoh's table. Both men had offended the king, though the details of their crimes were whispered among the guards with uncertainty. Some said there had been a plot against Pharaoh. Others insisted it was merely a grave mistake. Either way, both high officials were thrown into the same prison where Joseph was confined. By the jailer's command, Joseph was assigned to attend to them. He served them with humility, offering what comfort he could. The cupbearer and baker, once accustomed to luxury, now sat in the darkness of the prison, haunted by questions about their fate. Days stretched on, each one heavy with dread. Joseph watched them closely, recognizing their fear, yet offering kindness where others offered mockery. The men grew to respect him, sensing a peace within him that did not match the cold stones or iron chains around them. One night, both the cupbearer and the baker experienced dreams, strange, vivid, and unsettling. Dreams in Egypt held great significance, often believed to be messages from the divine. When morning came, Joseph noticed their troubled expressions and approached them gently. "Why do you look so sad today?" he asked. The cupbearer sighed heavily and replied, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." Joseph's heart stirred, remembering his own dreams from long ago, dreams that had set his life on this path of suffering. Yet he did not speak of himself. Instead, he said with confidence, "Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer spoke first. "In my dream, there was a vine before me," he said. "And on the vine were 3 branches. As it budded, its blossoms opened and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into the cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph listened intently, his mind illuminated by the wisdom God granted him. "This is its interpretation," he said. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will once again place the cup in his hand as you did before." The cupbearer's eyes widened with relief and joy. But Joseph's words did not end there. With hopeful urgency, he added, "When all goes well with you, remember me. Please show kindness to me and mention me to Pharaoh, for I was taken from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being in this dungeon." It was the first time Joseph openly expressed the desire to be freed, and though his voice remained calm, longing echoed behind every word. The cupbearer nodded, moved by Joseph's kindness and confident interpretation. Seeing the favorable interpretation, the baker quickly asked Joseph to hear his dream as well. "In my dream," he said anxiously, "there were 3 baskets of bread on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Joseph's expression grew solemn as he listened. He paused, then spoke the truth with compassion but unwavering clarity. This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh. The baker's face drained of color, but Joseph did not soften the message. He had learned from his own life that truth, however painful, must be spoken faithfully. 3 days passed, and Pharaoh's birthday arrived. As part of the celebration, he summoned both the cupbearer and the baker from the prison. Joseph and the other prisoners watched anxiously as the guards escorted the men away. The fate of each rested in Pharaoh's hands alone. When the day's events unfolded, Joseph's interpretations proved true. The king restored the cupbearer to his position, and once again he placed Pharaoh's cup into the king's hand. But the baker was executed according to the grim vision Joseph had delivered. As the cupbearer returned to Pharaoh's service, the moment Joseph had hoped for seemed within reach. Surely the man would speak on his behalf, tell Pharaoh about the Hebrew overseer who interpreted dreams with divine accuracy. Joseph waited each day for the sound of footsteps, for news of his release. But the days stretched into weeks, the weeks into months. The cupbearer, restored to his former comfort, forgot Joseph entirely. 2 long years passed. Joseph remained in the prison, tending to his duties faithfully, waiting on the Lord who had not abandoned him. Though disappointment settled heavily in his heart, he did not allow bitterness to take root. He had learned that God's timing, though mysterious, was always purposeful. In the silence of the dungeon, Joseph held on to the dreams of his youth and the belief that one day, perhaps when all hope seemed lost, God would lift him from the depths and place him where he had destined him to rise. 2 full years had passed since the cupbearer was restored to Pharaoh's service, and Joseph remained in the shadowed depths of the prison. Though time moved slowly, Joseph continued to carry out his duties with unwavering faithfulness, trusting that God saw what man overlooked. Yet far above the dungeon, in the grandeur of the royal palace, events were unfolding that would soon alter the entire course of Joseph's life. Pharaoh, ruler of Egypt and considered by his people to be divine, began to experience dreams so vivid, so disturbing, that his heart was troubled beyond measure. These dreams were unlike ordinary visions, they were messages wrapped in symbols, pressing into his mind with terrifying clarity. But though he summoned Egypt's wisest magicians and scholars, none could interpret the meaning. Their silence only deepened Pharaoh's anxiety, and all of Egypt grew tense under the shadow of the king's unrest. One night, Pharaoh dreamed that he stood on the bank of the Nile, the great river that sustained Egypt's life, economy, and worship. As he gazed upon the rippling water, 7 sleek, healthy cows emerged from the river and began to graze in the reeds. Their appearance radiated strength and abundance, as though Egypt's prosperity itself had taken the shape of cattle. But suddenly, 7 other cows came up from the Nile, gaunt, sickly, with ribs protruding and eyes hollow. These starving creatures, filled with unnatural hunger, stood beside the healthy cows before devouring them completely. The horror of the scene jolted Pharaoh awake. He lay in his bed, trembling, the image burned into his spirit. Eventually he fell asleep again, only to dream a second vision. This time he saw 7 full, robust heads of grain growing on a single stalk, plump, golden, and ready for harvest. But then 7 thin, scorched heads sprang up beside them, blasted by the hot desert wind. The withered heads swallowed the healthy ones in a strange and unsettling act of destruction. Pharaoh awakened once more, shaken to the core. The dreams lingered with such intensity that he knew they carried a message, but its meaning remained locked behind a veil of mystery. At dawn, Pharaoh summoned all the magicians, sorcerers, and wise men of Egypt to interpret the dreams. These were men trained in ancient texts, omens, and symbols, yet none could offer an explanation. They stood before Pharaoh in fear, aware that failure might cost them dearly. But no matter how they tried, the meaning escaped them. The palace buzzed with anxiety as Pharaoh's frustration grew, for a king without answers felt as vulnerable as a man stripped of armor. The future of Egypt seemed to tremble in the balance, wrapped in dreams no one could understand. Then, in a moment of sudden memory, the cupbearer stepped forward. His face flushed with guilt as he bowed and said, "Today I remember my faults." He told Pharaoh of the young Hebrew servant in prison who had interpreted his dream and the baker's dream with absolute accuracy. Pharaoh's eyes narrowed with interest. A glimmer of hope sparked within him, and he immediately sent for Joseph. In the darkness of the dungeon, Joseph heard footsteps approaching. The guards called his name, ordering him to prepare. He was rushed out of the prison, shaved, bathed, and given clean garments, all according to the strict customs of Egypt before entering Pharaoh's presence. Joseph's heart pounded as he was led through grand corridors lined with towering statues, polished stone floors, and servants bowing as he passed. He stood before Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the ancient world, yet Joseph's spirit did not waver. He bowed respectfully and waited for the king to speak. Pharaoh studied the young Hebrew with curiosity and desperation. "I have heard it said of you," he began, "that you can understand and interpret dreams." Joseph answered with humility and unwavering faith, "It is not in me." God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. His words caught the attention of the court, for Joseph acknowledged a power greater than Egypt's gods. Pharaoh, too troubled to argue, began recounting his dreams in detail: the 7 fat cows, the 7 lean cows, the full heads of grain, and the thin heads devouring them. When he finished, a hush fell over the throne room as Joseph prepared to speak. With clarity and authority, Joseph declared, "Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 good heads of grain represent 7 years of great abundance throughout all the land of Egypt. But the 7 lean cows and the 7 scorched heads of grain represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The famine will be so severe that the years of abundance will be completely forgotten. The reason the dream was given twice is because the matter has been firmly decided by God, and he will soon bring it to pass." Pharaoh listened intently as Joseph continued, offering not only interpretation but wisdom. Now let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man to oversee the land of Egypt. Let him appoint officials to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 years of abundance. Store the grain in cities for food, so that when the 7 years of famine come upon the land, Egypt may survive and not perish. Joseph's plan was practical, strategic, and inspired, clearly far beyond the capability of the average prisoner. The court murmured with astonishment. Who was this Hebrew slave to speak with such authority? Yet Pharaoh's face changed from anxiety to calm determination. He rose from his throne, his eyes fixed on Joseph. "Can we find anyone like this man?" he asked his officials, "one in whom is the Spirit of God?" The question was rhetorical, there was no one. In a single moment, Joseph's life transformed. Pharaoh declared, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people will submit to your word. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." He placed his signet ring on Joseph's hand, a symbol of ultimate authority. He dressed Joseph in fine linen, placed a gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in the chariot reserved for the second in command. Heralds shouted before him, "Bow the knee." From the depths of a prison cell to the heights of Egyptian power, Joseph had risen by God's hand. A new chapter had begun, a chapter that would save nations, fulfill dreams, and set the stage for the redemption of his family. The transformation of Joseph's life was so sudden and extraordinary that many in Egypt whispered about it for months. One day he had stood in chains, a forgotten prisoner in a foreign land. The next, he rode in Pharaoh's second chariot with the royal crest gleaming on his ring finger. But Joseph did not allow the grandeur of his new position to cloud his humility. He knew that every step, from the pit, to Potiphar's house, to the prison, and now to the palace, had been guided by God. As he stood before the throne, receiving Pharaoh's commands and the cheers of the people, Joseph felt the weight of responsibility settle upon his shoulders. His task was not one of glory but of stewardship. Egypt's future depended on the wisdom God had entrusted to him. Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, meaning the revealer of secrets, and provided him with an Egyptian wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Their union symbolized Joseph's full integration into Egyptian leadership, though his heart remained anchored to the God of his fathers. As Joseph rode through the streets of Egypt, crowds gathered to bow in respect, marveling at the young foreigner elevated above all except Pharaoh. Yet Joseph remained steady, neither arrogant nor overwhelmed. He knew that Egypt's prosperity and survival rested not on his own strength, but on the message God had revealed through Pharaoh's dreams. The 7 years that followed unfolded exactly as Joseph had interpreted. The fields of Egypt produced grain in abundance unlike anything the nation had seen before. The Nile overflowed with generous waters, enriching the soil and creating lush harvests that filled barns to breaking. Farmers marveled as their crops flourished under skies free of destructive storms and blights. Everywhere Joseph traveled, he witnessed the prosperity that God had foretold. The land seemed to thrive beneath Pharaoh's rule, and Joseph worked tirelessly to prepare for the future that only he fully understood. Joseph organized teams of officials who traveled across the land, overseeing the gathering of grain. Under his leadership, the government collected 1/5 of every harvest, storing it in massive granaries that Joseph ordered built in key cities. These storehouses rose like monuments of stone and brick, their interiors filled with grain that poured in from fields across Egypt. As the years advanced, the harvested grain became so plentiful that the scribes could no longer count it. The records grew too vast to maintain. The supply became like the sand of the sea, immeasurable and unending. Yet Joseph ensured everything was orderly, nothing wasted. During these years of abundance, Joseph's personal life also blossomed. Asenath bore him 2 sons. The first he named Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. It was not that Joseph had forgotten Jacob or Benjamin, but that God had healed the deepest wounds, those inflicted by betrayal, slavery, and abandonment. The second son he named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Even in Egypt, far from home, Joseph saw God's blessings unfold. His sons became living symbols of redemption and restoration. Though Joseph rejoiced in his growing family, he never let personal joy distract him from his mission. He traveled constantly, inspecting grain storage, strengthening administrative structures, and ensuring Egypt remained prepared. His calm confidence reassured the people, and many farmers grew to respect the foreign leader who worked harder than any servant. Joseph's reputation for fairness and integrity spread far beyond Egypt's borders as caravans carried news of the country's extraordinary harvests. Yet even in years of plenty, Joseph never forgot that famine was coming. He reminded officials frequently that abundance was not a guarantee but a temporary gift. While some citizens believed the prosperity would last forever, Joseph remained vigilant. He urged discipline, reminding them that God's warning was not to be taken lightly. His leadership influenced the entire culture, making storage and preparation a nationwide priority. Egyptians began to trust Joseph deeply, seeing him as a man who combined practical wisdom with divine insight. Meanwhile, the rest of the ancient world watched the prosperity of Egypt with envy and curiosity. Surrounding nations experienced moderate harvests, but none matched Egypt's overflow. Traders from Canaan, Libya, Cush, and even faraway Mesopotamia marveled at the bounty stored in Egyptian cities. They wondered at the foresight of its leaders, unaware that the true wisdom had come from God through the dreams of a Hebrew slave. As the seventh year of abundance approached its end, the signs of change slowly appeared. The Nile's flooding grew weaker, the wind carried a faint dryness, and the rains lessened. Farmers noticed the soil becoming stubborn, the harvests slightly thinner. Joseph observed these shifts with calm attentiveness. He knew the transition had begun. By the end of the seventh year, the last great harvest was gathered, and Joseph ordered the granaries sealed and guarded. The time of plenty had fulfilled its purpose. Now the famine would begin. When the eighth year dawned, Egypt's fields yielded almost nothing. The dryness that crept across the land became a consuming drought. The once rich soil cracked under the sun, and the Nile's waters receded. Farmers brought Joseph brittle stalks and empty baskets, fear clouding their eyes. Joseph remained calm, reminding them that the grain stored in the cities would sustain them. Soon, people from all regions of Egypt came to the granaries seeking food. Joseph opened the storehouses exactly as Pharaoh had commanded, selling grain at fair prices and ensuring order was maintained. But the famine did not stop at Egypt's borders. It spread across Canaan, through the land of Edom, into Syria, and even to distant countries that had once enjoyed steady harvests. The entire ancient world groaned under the weight of the drought. Word reached every nation that Egypt had bread, abundant bread, thanks to the mysterious wisdom of Pharaoh's second-in-command. From every direction, caravans began to move toward Egypt. Among them, in the land of Canaan, Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt. And so, unaware of the destiny about to unfold, he sent his sons on a journey that would reunite them with the brother they had betrayed. The famine tightened its grip across the entire region, stretching from Egypt through Canaan and beyond. Crops failed, wells dried, and livestock grew thin as pastures withered beneath relentless heat. Families who once lived in comfort now rationed their food, watching their supplies diminish with each passing week. In the tents of Jacob, the same distress settled heavily. The old patriarch, weathered by grief and age, had watched his household stores shrink dangerously low. Though he was a man of deep faith, he knew that prayer must be joined with action. So when he heard rumors that Egypt had grain in abundance, kept in great storehouses overseen by a wise leader, Jacob's resolve strengthened. He summoned his sons, the same 10 who had once handed Joseph over to traders, though he still believed his beloved son had been torn apart by wild beasts. When the brothers gathered before him, Jacob spoke with urgency and frustration. "Why are you standing here doing nothing?" he demanded. "I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." His voice carried both command and desperation. The brothers exchanged uneasy glances, for though the journey was long and dangerous, they knew they had no choice. Benjamin, the youngest and now Jacob's most cherished son, remained at home under strict protection. Jacob would not risk losing another child of Rachel. So the 10 brothers prepared for the trip, loading their donkeys with bags for grain and supplies for the road. The journey from Canaan to Egypt took several days. The brothers traveled along dusty trade routes, passing caravans of merchants, shepherds, and foreigners driven by the same famine. As they approached Egypt, they marveled at the difference between the parched lands they had crossed and the organized wealth of Pharaoh's domain. Granaries towered like fortified strongholds near the cities, guards patrolled the roads, and crowds thronged the marketplaces. Word had spread throughout the known world: Egypt had food. And at the center of this operation stood a single man, elevated by Pharaoh's authority to oversee all transactions, Joseph, though his brothers had no idea he still lived. Joseph, for his part, had grown into a confident and disciplined leader. Years of service in Pharaoh's court had shaped him into a man of commanding presence, dressed in fine linen, wearing jewelry that marked his rank, and speaking fluent Egyptian. Yet beneath the appearance of an Egyptian noble, his heart remained tied to the God of his fathers and to the memories of the family he had lost. As foreign groups came each day seeking grain, Joseph observed them closely. He knew famine was only beginning, and soon the entire world would rely on Egypt's stores for survival. Still, nothing could have prepared him for the sight that met his eyes when the next group entered the hall. There, among dusty travelers, Joseph recognized the faces he had not seen for more than 20 years, faces he had last glimpsed twisted with jealousy as they sold him into slavery. Time had aged them, their shoulders were broader, their beards fuller, but their eyes, their expressions, and their mannerisms were unmistakable. Joseph felt his breath catch in his chest. His heart pounded as memories rushed back: the pit, the pleading, the betrayal, the chains. Yet he did not reveal himself. Instead, he composed his expression, turning his face into an unreadable mask. To his brothers, he was simply a powerful Egyptian governor, one they must approach with respect. As was customary before Egyptian officials, the brothers bowed with their faces to the ground. The moment Joseph saw them bow, something stirred deep within him, a flicker of the dreams he had dreamed as a boy, the dreams in which his brothers bowed before him. Now those dreams stood fulfilled in living reality. Joseph's mind spun with emotion, but he kept his voice stern. "Where do you come from?" he demanded through an interpreter, though he understood every word they spoke. The brothers replied, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Joseph stared at them, searching their faces, reading their expressions. he could not allow himself to trust them immediately. He needed to know whether they had changed, whether their hearts still harbored the same cruelty that once destroyed his life. With calculated intensity, Joseph accused them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." Shocked, the brothers protested, "No, my lord. Your servants have come only to buy food. We are all sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Their words carried both truth and irony, for though they spoke sincerely, Joseph knew well the dishonesty of their past. He pressed further, maintaining his stern facade. "No," he insisted, "you have come to spy on the land." Desperate to prove their innocence, the brothers revealed details about their family. "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph's heart twisted at the words "one is no more." That was how they thought of him, gone, forgotten, erased. Yet he concealed his emotions. Their admission of Benjamin's existence struck him deeply. His younger brother lived. Joseph now needed to see him with his own eyes and test the sincerity of these men who had once betrayed him. He declared, "It is just as I told you, you are spies. But here is how you shall be tested. Send one of your number to fetch your youngest brother. The rest of you will remain confined, so that your words may be proven true." With that command, Joseph ordered them to be imprisoned. The brothers were taken away, bewildered and frightened, thrown into custody just as Joseph had once been because of them. For 3 days they remained there, certain that their lives were unraveling. On the 3rd day, Joseph summoned them again. His tone softened slightly, though his identity remained hidden. "Do this and you will live, for I fear God," he said. "If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in confinement, while the rest go and take grain back to your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified." The brothers exchanged fearful looks, for returning without grain would mean starvation, yet bringing Benjamin risked tearing Jacob's heart apart. In their distress, they spoke among themselves, unaware that Joseph understood every word. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," they said. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this trouble has come upon us." Reuben added, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you would not listen, and now we must answer for his blood." Their remorse pierced Joseph deeply. He turned away from them and wept privately, overwhelmed by the sound of their regret. When he returned, Joseph composed himself and selected Simeon to remain behind in custody. He ordered grain to be loaded onto their donkeys, and, moved by compassion he could not yet express openly, instructed his servants to secretly return each brother's silver into their sacks. When the brothers departed, they carried not only grain but fear, confusion, and the weight of a past they had never expected to face again. As dawn broke over Egypt, Joseph stood before the balcony of his residence, watching the brothers prepare to depart. The feast of the previous day had given him a glimpse of their transformed hearts, but he knew that one final test remained, one designed not to harm them, but to reveal the truth. The question Joseph carried for years still burned in his soul: would his brothers once again sacrifice a son of Rachel to save themselves, or would they stand together in loyalty, even when faced with disaster? Joseph had seen their remorse. He had witnessed how they treated Benjamin with tenderness instead of jealousy. But remorse alone was not enough. Repentance required proof. And so Joseph gave quiet instructions to his steward, setting in motion the test that would determine everything. The steward moved among the donkeys, loading sacks of grain just as before. He placed each brother's silver back into his sack, another gesture Joseph hoped would lead them closer to truth. But to Benjamin's sack, he added something precious, unmistakable, and dangerous: Joseph's own silver divination cup, a symbol of authority and a sacred object among Egyptian nobles. The steward covered it with grain and sealed the bag shut. When all was ready, the brothers mounted their donkeys and began the journey home, unaware that the most crucial moment of their lives approached swiftly behind them. As they rode away from the city, their spirits were lighter than they had been in years. Simeon was free, Benjamin unharmed, and the strange Egyptian governor had welcomed them with surprising kindness. They spoke with relief, even daring to hope that their long season of suffering had finally turned. Yet just as Egypt's gates faded behind them, Joseph turned to his steward and said, "Go after those men at once. When you catch them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Is this not the cup my master drinks from and uses for divination? What you have done is wicked.'" The steward obeyed immediately, leading a small contingent of guards. Before long, he caught up with the brothers, who turned in surprise at the sound of pounding hooves behind them. Their hearts leapt with fear. They dismounted quickly as the steward confronted them, repeating Joseph's accusation word for word. The brothers were stunned, outraged, bewildered. "Why does my lord say such things?" they protested. "Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. The silver we found in our sacks we brought back to you from Canaan. Why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of us is found with the cup, he shall die, and the rest of us will become slaves." The steward nodded solemnly. "Very well," he replied. "Let it be as you say. The one who is found with the cup will become my master's slave, and the rest of you shall be free." His words were merciful compared to their own offer, but the brothers, convinced of their innocence, agreed without hesitation. One by one, they lowered their sacks. The steward began with the oldest, Reuben, opening each bag while the brothers watched with pounding hearts. Reuben was clear, then Simeon, then Levi, then Judah. Relief swelled in their chests. Issachar was clear, then Zebulun, then Dan, Naphtali, and even Gad and Asher. Each passing sack strengthened their confidence, until the steward reached the last bag. Benjamin's. The youngest brother watched anxiously as the steward untied the cords. The brothers leaned in, breathless. The steward reached inside, sifted through the grain, and then lifted his hand. The silver cup glimmered in the sunlight. The brothers gasped as if struck. Shock, fear, and devastation fell upon them in an instant. The cup seemed to burn in the steward's hand, a symbol of doom. Benjamin's knees nearly buckled, and Judah grabbed his shoulder to steady him. In that moment, the brothers tore their garments in grief, the ancient sign of anguish so deep it could not be contained. Not one of them considered abandoning Benjamin. Without hesitation, they reloaded their animals and turned back toward the city. Their resolve was unbroken: if Benjamin was taken, they would all go with him. This was the moment Joseph had waited for, a test they did not even know they were taking, yet one they were now passing with courage and unity. When the brothers were brought into Joseph's house once more, they fell before him, faces to the ground. Joseph, still hiding his identity, looked upon them with controlled severity. "What have you done?" he demanded. "Do you not know that a man like me can divine such things?" Judah stepped forward, trembling yet determined, speaking for all of them. "What can we say to my lord? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, all of us, not just the one who was found with the cup." Joseph shook his head. "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found with the cup will become my slave. The rest of you may go in peace to your father." These words struck the brothers like a sword. Go in peace? Without Benjamin? That was impossible. The memory of another brother taken, a brother sold and lost, flashed in their minds like lightning. They would not let history repeat itself. Judah stepped forward again, courage burning in his voice. He recounted the entire story, the grief of Jacob, the death Joseph, the bond between father and son, the promise Judah had made. He said, "If I return to my father without the boy, my father, whose life is bound up with the boy's life, will die. I cannot bear to see the misery that would come upon my father." Then Judah offered himself completely. "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy. Let the boy return with his brothers." Joseph listened, his composure trembling. Tears welled in his eyes as Judah spoke of their father, of responsibility, of love stronger than fear. This was not the Judah who once sold him for silver. This was a changed man, a brother willing to lay down his life for Rachel's son. Judah's plea pierced Joseph's heart like an arrow. His test was complete. Their repentance was real. The time for concealment had ended. His heart burned to reveal the truth, to embrace them, to restore what had been broken for so long. And with that, the stage was set for Joseph's greatest revelation, the moment that would transform sorrow into joy and fulfill God's purpose that had been unfolding since the day Joseph first dreamed. The room trembled with tension as Judah finished his plea, his voice breaking under the weight of his sacrifice. He stood before Joseph not as the proud young man who once helped sell his brother into slavery, but as a transformed son willing to give his life for Benjamin and for the sake of their father. The other brothers stood behind him with grief on their faces and determination in their eyes. Joseph could no longer contain the storm inside him. Years of silence, longing, pain, hope, and divine purpose surged through him all at once. He felt his strength collapse under the force of their repentance. With a sudden cry, Joseph shouted to the attendants, "Leave me!" His voice echoed through the hall. The Egyptian servants looked startled but obeyed immediately, hurrying out until no one but Joseph and his brothers remained in the vast chamber. The moment the doors closed, Joseph's composure shattered. He wept with such intensity that his cries carried beyond the walls, and the entire household of Pharaoh heard the governor sobbing as though his heart were breaking open. The brothers stared, frozen in place, unsure whether to speak or flee. The powerful Egyptian ruler who had controlled their fate now stood trembling, tears streaming down his face. Then Joseph stepped forward, his voice choked and raw, and said in their language for the first time, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers felt the world tilt beneath them. Their minds could not comprehend what they were hearing. The man before them, the ruler of Egypt, the one who held their lives in his hands, was Joseph. The brother they betrayed? The brother they sold? Terror seized them, and their faces drained of color. They could not speak. Every memory of their cruelty flooded back with unbearable force. They stood before him not as travelers seeking grain but as guilty men exposed before the one they had wronged most deeply. But Joseph stepped closer, tears still falling. He saw their fear and understood it. Softening his voice, he said, "Come near to me." Slowly, hesitantly, they approached. When they were close enough to feel his breath, Joseph repeated gently, "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt." The words fell like a blow and like a bomb all at once. They braced for anger, for judgment, for revenge. But instead Joseph said the last thing they expected, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." His brothers stared, stunned. Joseph continued, "For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for 5 more years there will be neither plowing nor harvest. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God." The truth Joseph spoke lifted an immense weight from the room. Though the brothers carried the guilt of their actions, Joseph saw beyond the sin to God's sovereignty. What they intended for evil, God had woven into something greater: life, salvation, and redemption. Joseph's face shone with compassion. "He has made me like a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him, your son Joseph is alive. God has made him ruler of all Egypt. Bring him down to me quickly." Before they could answer, Joseph threw his arms around Benjamin, his full brother, and wept on his neck. Benjamin embraced him and wept as well, their tears mingling like rivers reunited. Then Joseph turned to his stunned brothers, the same men who once hated him, and embraced each of them, kissing them as he wept. Only after this tender reconciliation did the brothers finally find their voices, speaking with him through tears, trembling, and relief. News of Joseph's brothers soon reached Pharaoh's palace, and Pharaoh himself rejoiced. He instructed Joseph to send wagons, supplies, and provisions to bring Jacob's entire household to Egypt. "Tell your brothers to bring their father and their families," Pharaoh declared. "I will give them the best of the land, and they shall enjoy the fat of Egypt." Joseph arranged everything with meticulous care. The brothers began their journey back to Canaan with hearts overflowing, some with joy, some with awe, all with humility. They carried gifts, grain, wagons, and a message too miraculous to believe. As they traveled home, they debated who would speak first, who would tell Jacob the impossible truth. When they finally reached their father's tent, Jacob saw them approaching with strange expressions: shock, wonder, trembling excitement. Before he could speak, they blurted out, "Joseph is still alive. He is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart stopped. For a moment, he felt faint, unable to process their words. His eyes widened, and he sank down, stunned. It seemed too good, too impossible. But when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, his spirit revived. His eyes filled with tears as hope surged through him. "It is enough," Jacob whispered. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Joseph had waited more than 20 years for this moment. God had taken what was broken and restored it, taken what was lost and returned it, taken evil and turned it into good. And now the final step lay ahead, the reunion of father and son. The brothers, now changed men bound by loyalty, repentance, and mercy, prepared for the journey that would bring their family into Egypt, fulfilling a plan God had written long before any of them were born.